This is why you're not building muscle anymore. You've been training for a year, maybe two, and the beginner gains came fast before everything just stopped. The scale hasn't moved in months. The mirror looks exactly the same, and you're still showing up, still grinding, still watching your protein intake. Nobody tells you that the advice which got you here won't get you where you want to go. Most of what intermediate lifters believe about building muscle turns out to be either outdated, oversimplified, or completely wrong. And I'm not talking about bro science from some random gym guy. These are beliefs that even serious lifters hold, beliefs that research has now completely dismantled. Today we're covering the 3 pillars of muscle growth, which are training, nutrition, and recovery. But we're going deep into what the actual science says. The research comes from people like Brad Schoenfeld, who's published over 200 peer-reviewed papers on hypertrophy, along with Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization, Eric Helms, and others who've dedicated their careers to figuring this out. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what's holding you back and exactly what to do about it. Let's start with the biggest misconception in training. 8 to 12 reps is the hypertrophy zone. That's what everyone says. Anything lower builds strength. Anything higher builds endurance. This is the rep range myth, and it needs to die. Schoenfeld's 2017 meta-analysis examined 21 studies and delivered a definitive verdict, finding that changes in muscle hypertrophy were similar between low-load training at 60% of your 1-rep max or less, and high-load training above 60%. The effect size difference came out to 0.3, which is trivial, a narrow confidence interval. What this actually means is that you can build muscle with 5 reps or with 30 reps, because the hypertrophy zone isn't a zone at all. The original idea came from outdated research on acute hormone responses, where researchers observed that moderate rep ranges produced more of a testosterone and growth hormone spike after training. They assumed this meant more muscle growth. But here's what a 2025 paper in the Journal of Sport and Health Science confirmed, and it changes everything. Those acute hormonal spikes after training do not influence muscle protein synthesis or long-term gains. The correlation people assumed for decades simply doesn't exist. One thing actually matters, and that's getting close to failure. Morton and colleagues demonstrated in 2016 that even light loads produce comparable muscle growth to heavy loads. But only when you take those lighter sets close to failure. The mechanism behind this is mechanical tension, which serves as the primary driver of hypertrophy, and mechanical tension requires effort. Brad Schoenfeld put it best in a Barbend interview when he said that for bodybuilders, it's best to train across a spectrum of rep ranges to ensure maximal stimulation of all fibers. Stop obsessing over hitting exactly 10 reps. Train across multiple rep ranges, anywhere from 5 to 30, and focus on pushing those sets hard. That's what builds muscle. If proximity to failure matters, should you train to absolute failure on every set? The answer is no, and we have strong evidence for this now. Rafalo's 2022 meta-analysis in sports medicine found no evidence that training to momentary muscular failure beats non-failure training for muscle hypertrophy. Their 2024 follow-up study got even more specific, showing that training with 1 to 2 reps in reserve produced identical quadriceps hypertrophy compared to training to failure over 8 weeks. But here's the thing that changes how you should approach your training. The failure group experienced a 54% repetition loss from their first set to their final set, while the group keeping 3 reps in reserve only lost 27%. Think about what that means for your workout. Going to failure on set 1 crushes your performance on sets 2, 3, and 4, and your total volume for the session tanks. Volume, as we'll discuss in a moment, stands as the single strongest predictor of hypertrophy. Eric Helms recommends training at RPE 7 to 9, which translates to 1 to 3 reps in reserve for most sets. His specific suggestion breaks down to first set at 2 RIR, second set at 1 RIR, and final set to failure. One more nuance worth mentioning comes from Robinson and colleagues, who found in 2024 that heavier loads require less proximity to failure to stimulate growth, while lighter loads need to get closer to failure. When you're doing heavy sets of 5, you can stop a rep or 2 short. Sets of 20 demand that you push to near failure or actual failure. What actually predicts muscle growth, more than anything else, comes down to volume. Mike Israetel's volume landmarks framework from Renaissance Periodization gives us the clearest guidance, with 4 key numbers to understand. Maintenance volume sits at roughly 6 sets per muscle per week, And this is what it takes just to keep your current muscle mass. Minimum effective volume for intermediates lands at about 10 to 12 sets per week to actually grow. Maximum adaptive volume represents the sweet spot where you're getting the most growth, and for most people that falls between 12 to 20 sets per week per muscle group. Maximum recoverable volume marks your ceiling, the point beyond which you can't recover, and you start going backwards, which for most people sits somewhere between 16 and 25 sets weekly. Pellin's 2024 meta-regression examined 67 studies with over 2,000 participants and found 100% probability that hypertrophy increases with volume, estimating a 0.24% increase per additional weekly set. But here's where diminishing returns kick in. The Bayswalle 2022 systematic review found no significant differences between 12 to 20 sets versus more than 20 sets for either quadriceps or biceps. More isn't always better. The sweet spot for most intermediate lifters lands at 10 to 20 sets per muscle group weekly, spread across 2 to 3 sessions. Why spread it out? Cramming all your volume into one session leads to what some researchers call junk volume, where sets become so compromised by fatigue that the quality drops and the growth stimulus becomes minimal. How many times per week should you train each muscle? Schoenfeld's 2019 meta-analysis of 25 studies produced strong evidence that training frequency does not significantly impact muscle hypertrophy when volume is equated. That phrase, when volume is equated, matters tremendously. An earlier 2016 meta-analysis showed that twice-weekly training beat once-weekly training, with effect sizes of 0.49 versus zeros. Train each muscle at least twice per week, because this allows you to distribute your volume across multiple sessions while keeping each session's quality high. Going beyond twice weekly offers marginal additional benefit, but nothing demands that you do it. Something that might actually change how you train comes from the stretched position research. Pedrosa's 2023 meta-analysis found that exercises performed in a lengthened muscle position produced greater hypertrophy than those performed at shorter lengths, even when total volume stayed the same. Mayo and colleagues demonstrated in 2023 that overhead triceps extensions, which train the triceps at a longer muscle length, produced higher hypertrophy in all 3 tricep heads compared to pushdowns, which train the muscle at a shorter length. Wolf's meta-analysis at Stronger by Science estimated that lengthened partials potentially provide around 6 to 7% more muscle growth than full range of motion. I need to flag this as a contested area though. Stronger by Science also cautions that the mechanism isn't necessarily stretch-mediated hypertrophy in the traditional sense, and that it's likely greater muscle activation instead. Wolf's 2025 study found that lengthened partials and full range of motion produce similar hypertrophy in trained individuals. What you do with this information comes down to prioritizing exercises that emphasize the stretched position, things like deep squats, Romanian deadlifts, incline curls, overhead triceps extensions, and deep flies. Don't abandon full range of motion though. It still works extremely well. Something that separates beginners from intermediates is progressive overload strategy. When you first started lifting, adding weight to the bar every week came easily. That stops working after about a year or two because your nervous system adaptations reach completion and muscle growth becomes much slower. How you continue progressing matters now more than ever. Double progression stands as one of the most effective methods, where you work within a rep range like 8 to 12 reps. Once you can hit the top of that range for all your sets with a given weight, you increase the weight and start back at the bottom of the range. Rep progression operates similarly, where you add reps within your target range before adding weight. Set progression works too, though you should keep it to 10 to 20% weekly maximum. Don't overlook technique improvements either. Better targeting and deeper stretches at the same weight still represent progressive overload. Stronger by Science notes that when muscle growth is the main goal, lifters have much more flexibility to achieve progressive overload via load and repetition adjustments. Shifting to nutrition, the most important variable is protein. If there's one myth that refuses to die, it's the 1 gram per pound rule. You'll hear it everywhere. That rule overshoots by about 20 to 30%. Morton's 2018 landmark meta-analysis covered 49 studies with over 1,100 participants and identified a breakpoint at 1.62 grams per kilogram per day, beyond which no further resistance training induced gains in fat-free mass occurred. The upper 95% confidence interval suggests that around 2.2 grams per kilogram might be prudent if you want to absolutely maximize your chances. Let me translate this into real numbers. For a 80-pound person at 82 kilograms, the optimal range lands at about 131 to 180 grams of protein daily, not 200 plus. The International Society of Sports Nutrition's 2017 position stand recommends 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram for general exercising individuals, and during a caloric deficit, they recommend going higher at 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram to preserve lean mass. One more number worth knowing is your per meal dose, where research suggests 0.25 to 0.4 grams per kilogram per meal, or 20 to 40 grams absolute. You want enough leucine to trigger muscle protein synthesis, and that threshold sits at about 2 to 2.5 grams of leucine per meal. Your body can only absorb 30 grams of protein at once, and anything more gets wasted. You've probably heard that before. It's wrong. A 2023 study showed that 100 grams of protein in a single meal resulted in a greater and more prolonged anabolic response, lasting over 12 hours compared to just 25 grams. Your body absorbs virtually all the protein you consume, and the question isn't absorption, but rather optimizing muscle protein synthesis per meal. Memro found in 2014 that evenly distributing protein at about 30 grams per meal across 3 meals stimulated 24-hour muscle protein synthesis 25% more effectively than eating the same total with a skewed distribution. Even distribution works better, but it's about optimization and not waste prevention. And that's when we need to address the anabolic window. Schoenfeld and Aragon demonstrated in 2018 that the anabolic effects of a mixed meal last up to 6 hours. Eating within 3 to 4 hours before your workout makes immediate post-exercise nutrition far less critical than people think. The ISSN statement is clear, noting that the anabolic effect of exercise is long-lasting at least 24 hours, but likely diminishes over time post-exercise. Total daily protein intake matters far more than anything else. Timing matters marginally at best. You want a bulk, so you need a surplus. But how much surplus should you actually aim for? Slater's 2019 research in Frontiers in Nutrition found something that should change your approach. A 500-calorie surplus led to significantly more fat gain at 1.1 kilograms versus 0.2 kilograms with similar lean mass gains compared to a smaller surplus. Read that again. Similar lean mass gains, more fat gain. For advanced lifters, the recommendation sits at a 200 to 300 calorie surplus to minimize fat gain while still supporting growth. Beginners can tolerate 300 to 500 calories. The target rate of weight gain should land around 0.25% of body weight per week. Slower is smarter. Let's talk supplements, and this will be quick because most of them don't work. Creatine monohydrate remains the gold standard, with the International Society of Sports Nutrition calling it the most effective ergogenic nutritional supplement currently available. Meta-analyses show average increases of 8% greater muscle strength and 14% greater weightlifting performance versus placebo. The dose is simple at 3 to 5 grams daily, and loading is optional at 20 grams per day for 5 to 7 days, but not required. BCAAs, on the other hand, turn out to be largely unnecessary. Wolf's 2017 paper in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition was blunt, stating that dietary BCAA supplements alone do not promote muscle anabolism. BCAAs may actually decrease muscle protein synthesis when taken alone, because building muscle requires all 9 essential amino acids, and not just 3, Stuart Phillips, from McMaster, put it simply when he stated that if you're taking in adequate protein, BCAA supplements are a waste of money. Testosterone boosters deserve a mention too. Klemesh's 2019 review of 50 products found that fewer than 25% had any data to support their claims, and 67 of 109 ingredients had no studies whatsoever. Save your money. Buy food and creatine. The pillar that almost everyone underestimates is recovery, and it starts with sleep. The statistics here are striking and should change how you prioritize your nights. 1 night of complete sleep deprivation reduces muscle protein synthesis by 18%. That same sleepless night increases cortisol by 21%, and decreases testosterone by 24%. 70% of human growth hormone gets secreted during deep sleep. A sports medicine meta-analysis found that sleep loss decreases strength endurance by nearly 10%. Andy Galpin's position is unequivocal, stating that nothing enhances recovery more than sleep, and that in the world of recovery, nothing comes close to being as important as your sleep. His recommendation targets 7 to 9 hours minimum, with elite athletes often aiming for 8 to 10. If you're sleeping 6 hours a night and wondering why you're not growing, there's your answer. Sleep matters partly because of its relationship with cortisol, and cortisol deserves its own discussion. Cortisol inhibits protein synthesis by blocking the mTOR pathway, which serves as the primary signaling mechanism for muscle growth, and it accelerates protein breakdown at the same time. A Mendelian randomization study found that one standard deviation increase in cortisol was associated with reduced grip strength and whole body lean mass. This is causal evidence. Stress literally makes you smaller. Quality sleep rebalances cortisol rhythms, and post-workout nutrition helps close the cortisol window faster. Moderate cardio helps too, along with whatever stress management works for you, like meditation, walks, or therapy. None of that is just good for your mind. It's good for your muscles. How often should you take your foot off the gas? Mike Israetel recommends deloading every 4 to 6 weeks for most lifters, operating on the philosophy that training is better when it's stacked up. Run hard for 4 to 8 weeks, then take a deload week. Eric Helms takes a slightly different approach and recommends deloads on an as-needed basis rather than pre-planned. When you do deload, reduce sets by 30 to 50% across all exercises, while maintaining normal loading and proximity to failure. The key insight is that deload needs are individual. Some people need one every 4 weeks, while others can push 7 to 8 weeks. Reactive deloading based on fatigue markers may turn out to be superior to arbitrary schedules. One of the most persistent fears in lifting culture is that cardio kills gains. This is a myth. A 2022 meta-analysis was clear in stating that concurrent aerobic and strength training does not compromise muscle hypertrophy and maximal strength development. The standardized mean difference for hypertrophy came out to negative 0.01, which is essentially zero. What nobody expected was that one study actually showed an 11% muscle cross-sectional area increase in the combined cardio and strength group versus only 6% for strength. The optimal approach for lifters involves separating cardio and weights by at least 3 to 4 hours, and ideally 6 to 24 hours. If you have to do them in the same session, lift first. Focus on zone 2 cardio at 60 to 70% of max heart rate for 60 to 1444 minutes per week, and keep individual sessions under 90 minutes. Cardio isn't your enemy. Poor programming is. 2 quick points before we wrap up. Robert's research on ice baths found that cold water immersion attenuated long-term gains in muscle mass and strength after 12 weeks of training by blunting mTOR pathway activation and satellite cells. A 2024 meta-analysis in the European Journal of Sports Science concluded that cold water immersion may result in at least a small reduction of hypertrophy. The mechanism makes sense because cold reduces inflammation, but inflammation is required for muscle repair and growth. If hypertrophy is your primary goal, avoid ice baths immediately post-workout. Kerr's 2014 study found that alcohol consumed post-exercise with carbs caused a 37% reduction in muscle protein synthesis. Even when consumed with protein, there was still a 24% reduction. The threshold sits at around 0.5 grams per kilogram body weight, which translates to about 2 to 3 drinks for minimal impact. But 8 drinks causes a 37% MPS decrease, lasting at least 12 hours. If you're serious about growth, limit alcohol, especially within 24 to 48 hours of training. You're not building muscle because something in your approach is broken, and now you know what to look for. Training comes down to 10 to 20 sets per muscle group, weekly spread across at least 2 sessions. Training across multiple rep ranges with most sets at 1 to 3 reps in reserve, and taking your last set of each exercise to failure. Prioritize exercises in the stretched position and use double progression for progressive overload. Nutrition requires 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram daily, with 20 to 40 grams per meal spread across 3 to 4 meals. A 200 to 500 calorie surplus works for lean gaining. Creatine is the only supplement you actually need, and you should skip the BCAAs and testosterone boosters. Recovery demands 7 to 9 hours of sleep, minimum, because nothing replaces this. Deload based on fatigue, typically every 4 to 6 weeks. Moderate cardio supports rather than hinders gains. Avoid ice baths post-workout if growth is the goal, and limit alcohol. The science is clear. Mechanical tension drives growth. Volume stands as the strongest predictor of hypertrophy. Sleep is non-negotiable. Most of what you thought you knew about rep ranges, protein timing, and the anabolic window turns out to be either outdated or wrong. The difference between spinning your wheels and actually growing isn't genetics, supplements, or some secret program. It's understanding the fundamentals and then actually applying them consistently. If you've been trying to bulk for months and your physique still hasn't changed, this is for you. Most people trying to gain muscle are not lacking effort. They're lacking structure. You can work out 5 days a week, but if your calories, macros, and meals aren't dialed in, you will not grow. Period. That's exactly why I built my bulking blueprint. The step-by-step plan that shows you exactly what to eat, how much to eat, how to train, and how to bulk without getting fat. And listen, if my free videos already help you, imagine what happens when you follow the full system I actually use in real life. Stop guessing and start growing. Click the link in the description right now to unlock the bulking blueprint. Your dream physique starts the moment you take action, and that moment is right now. Now you know what to change, and the only question is whether you'll do it.